in the hills, the Black Hills of South Dakota. For his project, Borglum chose a mountain 5,700 feet above sea level, made of granite. It was positioned in just such a way that it caught the sun's light from early in the morning until late in the evening. And there, Borglum and his crew of workers sculpted the faces of 4 American presidents. You know them: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt. Many of you have had the privilege of visiting Mount Rushmore. Those faces, by the way, are so large that if they were to be positioned atop a statue, the statue would be over 500 feet tall. That's how massive that monument is. In the Bible, there is a chapter that is a monument to great faith. 17 times in Hebrews chapter 11, the term "by faith" is used to introduce men and women who distinguish themselves through their great faith. Their names are like a who's who from the Old Testament: Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses. But in verse 31 of Hebrews 11, there is a name that surprises us. By faith, Rahab the harlot. Because by faith, Rahab the harlot avoided perishing when all else were destroyed, because she received the spies in peace. Now, who was Rahab? And why is her story so important to us? She's mentioned 3 times in the New Testament: in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5, here in Hebrews 11, verse 31, and also in James 2, verse 25. But what was Rahab's story? And what applications do we draw from her story for our daily lives? Well, Rahab's story is actually found in the 2nd chapter of the book of Joshua. You may recall that last Sunday morning we looked at Joshua chapter 1 as God gave the commission to the heir to Moses' leadership, Joshua. Well, in the end of chapter 1, beginning with verse 10 through verse 18, God commanded the Israelites to make preparation to cross the Jordan River, to go into the land of Canaan, which he had promised them. So here in Joshua chapter 2, Joshua appointed 2 men to go in and spy out the land, particularly the city of Jericho. It was the first formidable city that the Israelites would encounter after they had crossed the Jordan River into the land of Canaan. It was a large city, a large walled city, had its own king. And so these spies go into the land, and they soon come to Jericho, where they go to the house of Rahab, who is a harlot, in order to find lodging. Now, we're going to come back to that just a little bit in just a few moments. But I want you to notice what happens in the story. We find that some of the king's spies noticed these 2 strangers coming into town, and the report soon went to the king that strangers were in the city. The people knew that the Israelites had amassed themselves on the east side of the Jordan, and so the king sent word to Rahab, saying, "Send out these 2 men who have come to you." Rahab replied by saying, "I didn't realize these men were spies, and they work here, but they have left. They left just before the gates to the city were closed in the evening." She said, "If you begin right now pursuing them, you can probably catch them." So the king's servants left and went all the way to the Jordan, the fords of the Jordan, seeking these spies who they presumed had fled from their city. And they didn't find them. Where were they? Well, you'll remember that Rahab had actually hidden these men on the roof of her house. She had covered them with flax that she had stacked on top of them. But before she did that, here in Genesis 2, beginning in verse 8, down through verse 13, or Joshua chapter 2, beginning with verse 8, down through verse 13, Rahab made a statement to these men I want you to read. She said, "I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that your terror is upon us." She goes on to say, "For we have heard what the Lord has done for you, how he dried the waters of the Red Sea when you came up out of Egypt, and how you have defeated the Amorites and completely destroyed the 2 Amorite kings, Sihon and Og. And when we heard these things, our hearts melted, and there was no courage left in any of us." Now listen to what she says. "For the Lord your God is God, in heaven above and on earth beneath." And she asked these spies, "Make a pledge to me that in exchange for the favor and the kindness that I show you, my father's household may be spared when the city is destroyed." Rahab's life was changed radically because of her faith in God. And if I were asked this morning to sum up Rahab's life, I think I would do it with this short sentence: dare to do right. Dare to do right. Now notice particularly how this affected Rahab. First of all, dare to do right in spite of your past. Rahab had been a harlot, a prostitute. One writer referred to her as the shady lady of Jericho. Now, there's no sugarcoating that fact. There's no disguising that fact. Some modern scholars have tried to pass off the idea that Rahab was merely an innkeeper. But I want to tell you, this was no Motel 6. There was a reason why men were coming in and out of her house frequently. Her house was located on the city wall. She actually had a window on that wall looking out. Extra-biblical Jewish literature, such as the Midrash, said that Rahab was one of the most beautiful, enticing, seductive women to ever live. And perhaps she stood at that window seeking to entice travelers coming into the city. It's no wonder these 2 men went there, because it was a perfect cover. They were not seeking her services, but they realized it was a place where they could covertly go without great suspicion, because people were constantly coming in and going out. But in spite of her past, Rahab dared to do right. Not only was she a prostitute, she was also a pagan. She was a Canaanite woman. And if you don't know anything about the Canaanites, go back and read Leviticus chapter 18. And you'll get an idea of the hideous nature of the Canaanite people. These were not nice people. They were wicked. They had totally and completely rejected any knowledge of God. They worshiped idols in scenes of gross sexual immorality, and even sacrificed their children to the pagan god Moloch. They were harsh, bitter, crude, rebellious people. And that's who Rahab was. She was not only a prostitute, she was a pagan. And yet, she did not allow those two facts to keep her from doing what was right. It is never a good idea to live in the past. It's a very poor neighborhood. If you live your life in the past, one of two things will happen to you, I can guarantee it. If you constantly live your life in the past, number one, you'll either be burdened with unnecessary guilt over things that were forgiven years ago, or number two, you will rest in complacency. You will say, well, I've already done that. I don't need to do it anymore. I've already taught my Bible class. I don't need to teach anymore. I've already done this. I don't need to do that anymore. If you live in the past, your life will be either consumed by guilt or you'll become restful in complacency. So many people allow themselves to be defined by their past, not Rahab. I've known people who have allowed mistakes of the past, broken promises, broken marriages, prodigal children, a whole host of things that may have happened in their past to define their present and their future. That was not Rahab. Suppose the Apostle Paul, when he had been asked or commanded by God to go and to preach, suppose Paul had said, Lord, I'm sorry, I'm just not worthy to do that. After all, as he said in 1 Timothy 1 verse 15, I'm foremost among all sinners. I'm chief of sinners. I was there when they stoned Stephen, giving my consent. Lord, I'm not worthy to do that. Or suppose Peter, on the day of Pentecost, when he was tasked with preaching the first gospel sermon on the birthday of the church, suppose Peter had said, oh, not me, Lord. You remember I denied Jesus 3 times, and I'm so sorry, but I'm just not worthy to do that. One of the early Christian writers by the name of Origen said in defense of Christianity that the church is a hospital for sinners. It does not leave men where it finds them. The gospel is not meant to inform. The gospel is not meant to conform. The gospel is not meant to reform. The gospel is meant to transform, to change. And that's what happened with Rahab's life. Her faith in the God of heaven and earth, the God of Israel, Yahweh, transformed her life. Number 2, do what's right in spite of your peers. Oh, how easy it would have been for Rahab to just go along with everybody else, to do what everybody else was doing, Jericho, just as they had done for years, and just continue going along with the flow. Have you ever noticed that it is only live fish who swim upstream? Dead fish don't swim upstream. Dead fish merely float downstream along with every other piece of river trash and waste there is. People are the same way. It is only people with faith and courage and conviction who swim upstream. Dead people float along with everything else. Do what's right, in spite of what your peers may or may not be doing. Don't do something just because it's popular. What is popular today may not be tomorrow. What's in fashion today may not be in fashion tomorrow. was thinking about that this morning even, as I was putting on my glasses. And I thought about how when I was a teenager and started wearing glasses, I wanted the latest style. My father wore glasses, and he wore glasses that were plastic, they were black, they were large, framed, and I thought they looked like an old fogey. So when I was a teenager and started wearing glasses, I wanted what was hip, what was modern. Got some gold frame, Easy Rider frames. You know what I'm talking about? Wore them. And then I came off to college and I noticed everybody wearing a different type. And so I got some like that. And then a few years later, the styles changed again and I got some like that. And then before long, people were wearing these glasses. Mike Connell would know as an optometrist, they hardly had any frame at all. And I got some of those. And lo and behold, look at what I'm wearing today. Just like my dad's 50 years ago. If you are looking to the crowd to determine what you're going to do in your life, you are looking to the wrong source, my friend. I would rather dare to stand by myself doing what is right than be lost with the multitude. And that's the way Rahab was. She dared to do right in spite of her peers. Number 3, she dared to do right in spite of peril. When she hid those spies on her roof, she was placing her life at great peril. Who was to say that the spies wouldn't go up, that the king's authorities would not go up on the roof and then start going through all of that flax that had been stacked there? Who was to say that they weren't going to be found? And if they would be found, then Rahab surely would have been put to death. But Rahab did what she knew was the right thing to do by hiding those spies. What was the right thing? She said, please ensure that when the city is destroyed, my father's household, my father, my mother, myself, my brothers, my sisters, and all of theirs will be spared. She was willing to take that risk. And then number 4, do what is right in spite of perplexity. I'm sure there were things about all of this that Rahab didn't understand. But faith led her to make this choice. The spies told Rahab, after we have left, and she let them down on a cord outside the window, after the gates of the city had been secured for the evening, after the king's soldiers had all left in pursuit of the spies going the opposite direction, Rahab told the spies, we're going to let you out the window on a cord, on a rope. Head to the hill country, stay there for 3 days before you make your way back to your people. And they were told, and these men told Rahab, here's what you must do. When we come, you're to hang this rope, this scarlet rope. Do you see significance right there? Scarlet. You're to hang this scarlet rope outside your window. What were the Israelites way back in Egypt told to do to the doorpost of their home the night the death angel passed over? They were to take that scarlet blood of the lamb and put it upon the doorpost of their home. And God said, when I see the blood, I will pass over. What is it that cleanses us from our sin today? It is that scarlet blood of Jesus. And here, Rahab was told, put the scarlet cord out your window. And when we see that, Your house and all who are within that house will be saved. Only do not let anyone go outside the house. Oh, there's all types of imagery in that story. The blood, that scarlet blood, is what saves us. It puts us into God's house. In God's house, there is salvation. Now, I'm sure Rahab didn't understand all of this. But here's what Rahab did know. She knew that God was the Lord. And she knew that she'd not been living right. And she needed to make a change in her life. And she needed to put her faith in the God of Israel. What difference did it make? Well, go to the New Testament and notice, if you will, Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. For in that verse, we're given part of the genealogy of Jesus, the ancestors of Jesus. And who do we find? Salmon begat, or was the father of Boaz by Rahab. Salmon, a prince of Egypt, of Israel, about to change the whole Bible. Salmon, a prince of Israel, marries Rahab. They have a son, Boaz. You remember who Boaz was? Later married Ruth. Boaz and Ruth have a son named Obed. Obed has a son named Jesse. And Jesse has a son named who? David. Rahab is David's great-great-grandma. How's that for blowing your mind? And here she is, this woman who had been a prostitute, in the lineage of Jesus Christ. How is that possible? Well, there are two more verses in the New Testament that talk about Rahab, and both of them tell us how it's possible. By faith, Hebrews 11, verse 31. You see how by works Rahab, James chapter 2, verse 25. It was her faith and her works combined that gave her such a place of stature in the kingdom of God. And so it is in our lives. Faith has this transforming power that cannot be found anywhere else. I love this poem as I conclude by Myra Brooks Welch. I've quoted it many, many times through my years of preaching, but it's always, always pertinent. It's entitled, "The Touch of the Master's Hand." It was battered and scarred, and the auctioneer thought it scarcely worth the while to spend much time with the old violin, but he held it up with a smile. "What am I bid for the old violin? Who'll start the bidding for me? $1, who'll make it $2? $2, who'll make it $3? $3 once, $3 twice, going for $3. But no. From the back of the room, a gray-haired man came forward and took up the bow. Then, wiping the dust from the old violin and tightening up all the strings, he played a melody pure and sweet as the angels sing. The music stopped, and the auctioneer, in a voice that was quiet and low, said, "What am I bid for the old violin?" And he held it up with the bow. 1,000, 1,000, he'll give me 2. 2,000, he'll give me 3. 3,000 once, 3,000 twice. Going and gone, said he. The people cheered, but some of them said, we don't quite understand. What changed its worth? Came the reply, the touch of the Master's hand. And many a man with his life out of tune and battered and scarred by sin is auctioned cheap to the thoughtless crowd, much like the old violin. A mess of pottage, a glass of wine, a game, and he shuffles along. He's going once, he's going twice, he's going and almost gone. But the Master comes, and the thoughtless crowd can never quite understand the worth of the soul and the change that is wrought by the touch of the Master's hand. I'm so glad that Rahab experienced that touch, aren't you? And it may be that you need to be touched by his hand today. If you're not a child of God, I hope that you won't delay. Though we're social distance, I assure you we'll take every precaution to baptize you in a way that will be safe and that will be a blessing to you. If you need to be baptized into Christ, don't wait. If, as a Christian, you need to come and have encouragement and prayer. As I mentioned last week, we can't surround you physically, but we'll surround you prayerfully and spiritually. If there's any need in your life, may we help you while we stand and while we sing.